Nominees will now give their presentations. I've asked our candidates to limit their remarks to 10 minutes each, with a question and answer period following. And we'll start in order of the alphabet. Zoe Barsness, Associate Professor of the Milgard School of Business from UW-Tacoma. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for providing me this opportunity to speak with you today. My goals are threefold. First, I'd like to introduce myself and give you a better sense of who I am. I'd like to share some of my relevant experience to help you understand how I might bring value to this role. And I'd also like to highlight some of the key challenges and opportunities, which we've already been chatting about in depth today, that I perceive are facing the institution and which I believe strongly that faculty have a critical role in helping to address. In terms of my background, I'm a professor, as Kate mentioned, of management at the Milgard School of Business on our Tacoma campus. I arrived at UW 15 years ago, ironically by way of Texas A&M University. Aggie Land did not have the same appeal as the Puget Sound region did to me. I also want to remark that even though I'm a business school professor, I started my academic career as an undergraduate liberal arts student. I was a student of comparative history. That broad program of study informed and hugely impacted who I am as a person, as a scholar, and a teacher. And I highlight this formation because I strongly believe we don't do an effective enough job of communicating to our legislators in Olympia, to the public as a whole, the importance of just such an education. We are not training people for specific jobs. We are training people for life. We are training people for how to manage their own careers and professions. And the critical thinking, the complex reasoning, the ability to communicate are fundamental skills that can be achieved in any of a number of incredible disciplines that we offer as a great research university. And I think that relates to the importance of our role as faculty in order to communicate those, that value that we bring above and beyond the economic value of our programs. Back to kind of my background, I left that comparative history study and went to work in the private sector for a couple of years in consulting and then in a startup software company. Obviously, clearly driven by my history studies. And a lot of the questions I perceived in the work world drove me back to pursue a graduate degree in organizational behavior. And those questions have largely informed my scholarly work since. I've studied the impact of alternative work arrangements, including contingent work and new technologies, on individuals and teams and organizations. I'm a student of negotiation and also the relationship between organizational justice and trust. I share those details largely to give you a sense of what motivates me. I've always thought to understand better how certain aspects of our organizational context either facilitate or impede our ability to collaborate with each other. And my scholarship has largely been informed by a very pragmatic desire to figure out how we as members of organizations can work together more effectively to make things better. And I think that's largely what's pulled me into doing governance work. In terms of my faculty governance expertise, it's varied. At the campus level, I've served as the vice chair, past chair of the University of Washington-Tacoma's Faculty Assembly. I've served for many years on the Executive Council and a broad array of standing committees and shared task forces. On a small campus, it is next to impossible to hide. At the university level, I've served 2 terms on the Faculty Council for Tri-Campus Policy, 2 terms as a faculty senator, and I've also served on the Cabinet of Advisors to 5 faculty senate chairs: Bruce Balick, J.W. Harrington, Susan Astley, James Gregory, and now Kate O'Neill. I feel that those years have given me a very clear idea of the challenges that Senate chairs and vice chairs face, and I've very much gained an appreciation of the hard work that goes into maintaining our tradition of shared governance and sometimes the necessity of renewing it. Across diverse bodies and under 5 different campus administrations, back to the interim point, I've worked in situations where faculty governance has been weak and where it's been productively collaborative with administration, and I much prefer the latter situation, and I've always worked hard to foster it. That said, my diverse experiences have really driven home to me the importance not only of reaching out to work with the administration, but sometimes the necessity of standing up and presenting a forceful faculty perspective on the issues at hand. Strong faculty governance is obviously critical to our ability to achieve all facets of the UW mission, whether that be discovery or education. And it's incumbent upon us, and it's our responsibility as faculty to ensure and secure and tend the health of those bodies. The Senate is clearly a critical forum, as are the various standing councils and committees within our individual academic units. Each of those bodies is an important conduit of information to and from the faculty, and even more important, it's an arena in which action and collaboration among faculty and between faculty and other key internal stakeholders, not just administrators, but students and staff, occur. As a vice chair, I would continue the work that the current and previous Senate leaders have done to support those bodies and enhance the communication and linkages amongst them. Those linkages are critical to ensure that we have more effective avenues for faculty voice and engagement, especially as we address some of these intense challenges that face us. In terms of those challenges and opportunities, obviously, as we're all acutely aware, we're in a period of great disruptive change in higher education. As has been alluded to in depth already, over the last decade, the hierarchy of our primary funding streams has been inverted. We've moved from being a state-funded institution to a state-assisted institution. Those subsidies remain significant and hugely important to us. They provide a critical floor for all of our discovery and education missions, but they're subordinate to other sources of funding, namely tuition and grants and contracts. That shift in funding has had implications for our individual units and the institution as a whole. It's forcing units to redefine their strategic priorities. It's put new pressures on units and created new incentives for people to compete for enrollments. It's also increased pressure on the institution to monetize our discovery endeavors and potentially also innovations in our teaching modalities. Hence, it is very important that the Senate and the faculty remain engaged as we wrestle with issues of intellectual property. Those developments also raise a host of questions when we think about our education mission. Questions, as Anna Mari raised, of affordability, access to the university. There's the evolution of student expectations and as a consequence of increasing cost. And an increased need for support from the institution, not only in terms of financial aid, but as they navigate their way through their degrees and seek to achieve educational attainment. Student recruiting, retention, completion rates, those are all areas that should be of concern to faculty and on which faculty have unique insights to offer. On the faculty front, the adoption of new funding models already has impacted and will continue to influence decisions about how we staff our programs and how we choose to shape the composition of our faculty going forwards. We've talked about the lecturer task force. We've talked about the crafting of a new faculty policy. These are all efforts that need to be sustained and built out, as Anna Mari mentioned, if we're going to assure that all of our faculty, not just tenure track, but non-tenure track faculty, are adequately supported and fairly rewarded for their efforts and contributions to the institution. The second great source of disruption in our world is obviously new technologies and modalities for education and teaching. They threaten because they've given rise to new competition, and they entice because they've opened up access to our institution to a wider and more diverse array of students, whose needs don't always necessarily align well with those of our more traditional students, and that has implications back for recruitment, retention, and the effectiveness of our efforts to foster their success. Historically, we've had a very geographic strategy. In fact, the establishment of the two smaller campuses was largely driven to provide geographic access to previously underserved populations in the Puget Sound region. When I first arrived at UW-T, there was a tagline that went something along the lines of education for time-bound, place-bound students. Okay? That's true, and we still serve many of those same students, but Tacoma and Bothell campuses have become destinations of choice, not just necessity, for students seeking a UW degree. That said, the UW part of their degree is hugely important and highly valued by those students. even if they've chosen the Tacoma or the Bothell flavor as opposed to the Seattle flavor of the UW educational experience. Those new technologies, however, mean that we now compete with players from outside our region. You've got Northeastern University, you've got Western Governors University, the list goes on and on. It's time that we start thinking about the institution as needing to compete in terms of products as opposed to geographies. Our programs, in a sense, are our products. And what's interesting is we may, as a consequence of that, see some instances of competition even amongst the units within the UW as we seek to attract enrollments to our programs. Obviously, such entrepreneurship is clearly a positive development, okay? But it can also be concerning when one unit's entrepreneurial initiatives undermine another's ongoing programs. So in the face of that type of intensified competition for students, given our need to communicate more effectively the social and economic value that we deliver to our external constituencies, I think it's critical that we address several questions, and these are just a few amongst a long list. We need to understand better who will be the UW student and define that better. What will be the benefit to them in society of an educational experience at the UW, and what will motivate them to pursue a degree at the UW Seattle or Tacoma or Bothell as opposed to some other, something online or some other local competitor. Why is it in the interest of the legislators, our voters in this state, our businesses, and our families to continue to support our endeavors here at the UW? We have yet to articulate fully and clearly what it is about the UW educational experiences that's unique and what that we uniquely contribute in terms of broader value. Those are really important questions, and it's the faculty who are uniquely positioned to help us answer them. I worry that in a rush to exploit new opportunities, we will squander what truly sets us apart and makes us a higher education destination of choice, not only for students, but for faculty. Finally, I strongly believe that all three campuses play an important role in the UW's ability to respond creatively and effectively to the challenges we face. The UW is now a true multi-campus system. The two smaller campuses have become thriving, substantial institutions in their own right, each with its own unique character, needs, and strengths. For the UW as a whole to sustain its ability to respond effectively to the changes that are buffeting us today, continued strategic growth is required not just for the UW Seattle, but also the Bothell and Tacoma campuses. I believe a pressing question then for us as an institution as a whole is how do we build upon our respective strengths at the college, school, and campus levels while leveraging the unique character of UW's 16 individual units to create something that uniquely delivers greater returns to the institution and stakeholders at every level. An important challenge unique to that endeavor then is how we assure space for faculty of voice in such inevitable inter-unit negotiations and collaborations, and how do we encourage faculty to engage in those collaborations. As a faculty member who began her academic career at a large research institution comparable to the Seattle campus, yet it was drawn to the entrepreneurial challenge of building out an academic program and a campus anew, I believe I can bring a very different and valuable perspective to our collective efforts to ensure and sustain a productive role for shared governance at the UW. I'm very honored to have been nominated by my colleagues to serve as Vice Chair of the Faculty Senate, and I look forward to the opportunity to work on your behalf if elected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much so. Our next candidate is Charles Hirschman, Professor of Sociology here, UW Seattle.
When I was first asked to consider being nominated as a candidate for Vice Chair of the Faculty Senate, my immediate response was one of panic. How could I get out of this? But then my superego, perhaps my sense of civic responsibility, kicked in, and I thought that I really should agree to serve. I've had the great privilege of being a professor at the University of Washington for 28 years. I have a huge debt both to the institution and my colleagues who have both tolerated me and generally supported me. After meeting with the nominating committee and thinking more about it, I decided the opportunity was more than something that I should do, but was actually one that I would like to do. I'd like to tell you more about the ideas that led to this conversion, but first let me introduce myself. I am a sociologist, demographer. My primary appointment is in the Department of Sociology, but I also have a joint appointment in the Evans School of Public Affairs. In addition to these units, I also have been very active in interdisciplinary programs, and I'm affiliated with the Southeast Asia Center, which is housed in the Jackson School, and the Center of Studies for Demography and Ecology, better known by its acronym CSDE. I teach undergraduate and graduate courses on a wide variety of topics, from demography to race and ethnicity. I've just completed a book on the transition from high school to college with a focus on disparities by gender, race, and immigrant generation. In addition to studying the United States, I've worked quite a bit in Southeast Asia, the countries of Malaysia and Vietnam in particular, and demography is one of the few social sciences that does receive support from NIH, and I've been fortunate to have received extramural support for most of my career. I believe that the academic calling requires all of us to periodically take turns to sustain the institution and the organizations that have supported our careers and give us the extraordinary freedom to teach and do research. When asked to engage in service activities both locally and nationally, I try to say yes unless I'm swamped by competing demands. I was recruited to the UW many years ago to be the director of CSDE, the Demography Center, and later I served as chair of the Department of Sociology. Over the years, I seem to have served on almost every imaginable committee, locally and in a wide variety of professional organizations. I've just completed a term on the NICHD Population Sciences Committee that reviews grant proposals, and I'm currently serving on 2 National Research Council committees on the topic of immigration in the United States. Although I've not been active in the Faculty Senate in recent years, I did serve on the Faculty Senate Executive Committee in the 1990s and also chaired the Faculty Council on Faculty Affairs. Now back to the question that led to my conversion from willing to serve for perhaps eager to serve. I suppose it is the hope that I might be able to make a difference on issues that I care deeply about. I will discuss these issues in a moment, but I want to assure all of you who perhaps maybe be doubting that I do not presume to have the answers to many of the questions that beset this great university. My notions of thoughtful leadership is one that tries to listen to the pulse of the faculty, encourage discussion, including debate, and then tries to nudge the deliberations toward a consensus and to try to articulate a clear vision. Of course, unforeseen events and other new issues can intrude. This has happened to me many times throughout my career. So for what it's worth, here are the 2 issues that I'd like to see considered for discussion. The first is the affordability and the quality of undergraduate education, which I do not see as competing goals at all. These have already been discussed at the meeting today. My interest in undergraduate education is not only from my current vantage point, but also from my own experiences. I like to claim that I worked my way through college, but truth be told, I had lots of help along the way. I did work when I was an undergraduate, sometimes more than 30 hours a week, but that was only part of the story. When Russia shot Sputnik into orbit, there was a fear that the United States was falling behind in science and higher education. Congress passed the National Defense Education Act to help students from modest backgrounds to attend college. I received an NDEA loan. It had a fixed 3% interest. Payments were deferred until I had completed all my education, including public service, and 50% of the loan was forgiven if I taught at a school or college. On top of this, I was also the beneficiary of very low tuition in a public university because most of the costs for higher education were paid for by general state revenues. The logic was that higher education was a public good and the cost should be broadly shared by taxpayers so that all students could afford to college regardless of their economic circumstances. The financial model for public higher education has changed in Washington State as it has throughout much of the country. Over the last 5 years, the state of Washington has cut its general support for higher education by 50%. The University of Washington has covered the gap by raising tuition. I understand the rationale. Without additional revenues, the University of Washington would not have survived, and my salary would not be paid. But it pains me to think that if I were a high school graduate today, I certainly could not work my way through college. Addressing the problems of affordability and the quality of undergraduate education will require a renewed state and national commitment to higher education. I know that the university administration, the faculty senate, and student groups are all very dedicated to this cause. In the meantime, I hope that we can explore options to stretch our very limited resources to improve the reach and the quality of undergraduate education. One particular concern of mine has been the decline in the number of graduate students that are supported on the instructional budget. This has always struck me as a case of penny wise and pound foolish. Teaching assistants are force multipliers in the instructional mission of large public institutions. They save faculty time by grading and meeting students during office hours. They help to personalize instruction in the discussion sections of large classes. I've also been impressed by the quality of teaching by our well-trained graduate student instructors. Hiring advanced graduate students as instructors is a win-win outcome. It's cost-effective, and they support students who are completing their dissertations. Inadequate support for graduate students is one of the major issues facing this university. My other issue is the social contract between PIs of extramural grants and the university. Of course, there is no social contract between PIs and the university, and that's the problem. The UW has an enormous national and international reputation because our faculty are so successful in getting external grants, even though the pay lines at NSF and NIH are lower than ever. In recent years, changes in government policies at the federal and state level, most of them well-intended, have increased the administrative burden on universities and the recipients of grants. In my experience, the university has passed along much of the burden and the risks to the individual PIs. Many of us grumble about these matters and the implicit assumption that PIs of grants would not act honorably without heavy-handed regulation. I think there actually should be increased attention to ethical values and behavior, honesty, integrity, fairness, and accountability. These are universal values that are widely shared at the university. We can probably do a better job of reminding all of us how to practice them in our day-to-day lives, including the management of research grants. However, I'm not sure that the current system is very effective. It is very, very time-consuming and probably more adversarial than it needs to be. I do not have the answers to these complex issues, but acknowledging the problem might be the first constructive step. Thank you for listening to me today. It's a great honor just to be considered for the position of Faculty Senate Vice Chair. If elected, I will do my very best to fulfill the trust of my colleagues and to uphold the high standards of this body. Thank you.
Are there questions? And Zoe, do you want to come back up? Are there questions either for Zoe or Bart or Charles? I forgot to give you an opportunity to ask questions of Zoe. Anybody have a? No hard balls to throw at the candidates?
No, they might all be saying soccer.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.